Joining me on the podcast today, one of the smartest basketball minds that I know, and he happens to be a guy that loves his Dallas Mavericks. He is the digital content manager and the houser of he controls Studio 41. If you know about Studio 41, it is his domain to take control of. It is Bobby Karalla of Mavs.com joining me here on the podcast. Bobby, as always, I appreciate the time, man. How are you?
Oh, I'm great, man. Thank you for having me. And everyone should be familiar with Studio 41 because you've been in there a few times now.
I
So
have.
if you don't know, now you know. You need to tune into everything we're doing in there.
Yeah, Studio 41 is it's a nice it's palatial. I like to call it palatial because there's a lot going on in there, but you feel very comfortable and very at home in there. Shout out to Katya and Isaac Harris and everyone who gets to have fun in Studio 41 with you from time to time. So unfortunately, not having much fun right now. If you're a Mavs fan, that is, because they're not in the playoffs. Has it been weird not seeing the Mavs? We've gotten used to seeing them in the playoffs over the last, few years now. Is it still a little weird not seeing Luka and the guys playing playoff basketball at the moment, especially given what happened last year?
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of weird, especially, and I guess like, we all kind of knew this would be the case, right? Because we saw the West play basketball for
Mm-hmm.
82 games this year. But like, I'm not super impressed by what we're seeing in the playoffs right now. And so it's like, dude, they just that's why we say every year, everyone in the media, every fan says all you need to do is just get in and you have a
Mm-hmm.
chance, right? And it's just such a bummer that they could not get in because I feel like they could play with some of these teams. But they also had 82 games to prove that they could play with these teams and they came up short. So I don't know. It's just a weird outcome, but yeah, it does not feel normal right now, not watching Luka and Kyrie play.
And as we record this, we'll get into plenty throughout the course of our time here. But obviously, as we record this, we're less than a week away from the NBA Draft Lottery. Now, of course, for those that don't know, the Knicks could be receiving the Mavericks pick if it does not fall within the top 10. If it does, the Mavericks are able to keep their pick. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, the Mavericks are one of two teams in NBA history that has never moved up when it comes to the draft lottery odds. Is that right?
Yeah, it's them, and I want to say Minnesota is the other one. And
Mm-hmm.
Minnesota is one of the teams beneath the Mavs. Although I think somebody else has their pick, maybe I'm not sure. But I mean, my God, the Mavs are due. They're 0 for 16. 0 for 16.
Yeah, I'm about to say, I'm sure it might be time for the basketball guys to maybe smile on the Mavericks a little bit and help them out here because, as you mentioned, a disappointing season for this team. And there's a number of ways we could go here, but as closely as you watch this team and as closely as you cover this team and watch what they do both offensively and defensively, where for you did it go wrong? Obviously, defensively, there were a lot of things that we could say, but for you, what was maybe the one or two things that you say, if I could point to it, that's what went wrong for the Mavericks this past season?
I mean, the biggest things, the two biggest issues are both defensive, on the defensive side of the ball, but they're kind of different. One, in the half court, guys on the perimeter just got beat too often. That was an issue that also sprang up in the 2020-21 season. So not the first time the Mavs played the Clippers, but the second time. All throughout that season, everybody was just roasting KP on Twitter after every game because like he just was not stopping anybody at the rim. But it's like, well, he's just one guy. You only have so many fingers and toes that you can use to plug holes in the dam, right? And if eventually you run out and some water is going to get through. And it was that same way this year, especially after the trade. Obviously, losing Dorian Finney-Smith and then Maxi Kleber, you were basically without him for like half the year. And then whenever he
Mm-hmm.
came back, he wasn't quite himself. Josh Green was always seemed to be in foul trouble. And Reggie Bullock is 31, 32 years old, and he's just one guy who's like 6'5". So he's not stopping Giannis. He can guard Dame maybe, but he can't guard LeBron. So you need somebody else to step up. And they just didn't have the personnel and they did not have the stick-to-itiveness to stay in front of guys. And then the other big issue was, the offense was fantastic, but in the rare occurrence where they would miss a shot, they just could not get back on defense. And, I understand the frustration with the coaching staff for everything that has gone wrong this season. But NBA head coaches and NBA assistant coaches do not and should not tell players, hey, if you miss a shot, you just got to get back. Like that's just general basketball kind of understanding. And they just weren't able to do it enough. The Mavs would miss a three. Well, they were the worst team in the NBA at getting stops following a missed three. They were the worst team in the NBA, getting stops following a missed free throw. They take a lot of threes and they missed a lot of free throws. And so, it just exposed themselves or it left themselves exposed in transition over and over again. And they just could not get back and get set. So, too many breakdowns when they were set. And also they didn't give themselves enough opportunities to get set up. So I think, you have to upgrade the personnel on defense for sure in order to fix this, because what we saw this year was a little uncomfortable at times, Kevin.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's funny because we always talk about defense as kind of, the amount of effort that you put into it. But as you've watched some of these teams, especially in the playoffs, I'll use the Lakers as an example. Talent defensively is huge as well. The ability to understand where you need to be, spacing, how to be able to help your man, and being able to consistently have that kind of IQ on play to play. And it just felt like at times, while the effort may have been there or at times not been there, it just felt like there were too many breakdowns defensively, whether it came to spacing, where they needed to be on a possession, and how that was executed or the lack thereof, that I felt like caused a lot of problems. Did you feel that way as well watching this team this season?
Yeah, for sure. And, again, part of that is personnel. And I think this is the part where the coaching and the schemes come into play. If you don't have the personnel like the Lakers do, they have just this generational interior defender, and then they have a bunch of wings. Same could be said. The Nuggets don't have the interior defense, but they have KCP and Bruce Brown and Aaron Gordon. They have all these guys that can hold their own one-on-one. If you don't have the personnel to do that, what you can do is dial up the pressure a little bit and try and force turnovers. Or what you can do is what Rick Carlisle chose to do during his time here, which is dial down the pressure as much as possible and just play drop coverage, play very conservative, don't take any chances because you don't want to leave yourselves exposed. Well, what happens when you play that way is you give up a lot of open pull-up jump shots. Mm-hmm. What happens when you try and force a bunch of turnovers is sometimes you are going to get beat because you're jumping passing lanes or you're double teaming guys, but you're also going to get a lot of runouts as a result of that increased pressure. The Mavs didn't really do either of those things. They were a bottom 10 defense in forcing turnovers. They were a bottom 10 defense at field goal percentage allowed at the rim. And so if you're constantly getting beat at the rim and you're not forcing turnovers, then what really are you doing to make your opponent uncomfortable? Offenses are just simply too good. You cannot just hope that they miss. You have to take the fight to the other team in some way, whether that's on the perimeter, tricking them, duping them, bamboozling them and forcing them into a turnover, or if it's just stuffing them at the rim and humiliating them, on national TV. So you have to do one of those two things. They just didn't really do either of them.
Yeah, because it felt like at times when you watch them, there was just confusion. There wasn't enough discipline. It felt like it on that end of the floor. And for me, it felt like teams offensively simply, for lack of a better phrase, didn't respect the Mavs, whether it came to interior presence, to defend the rim, or their ability to guard them on the perimeter one-on-one. I think teams felt like they could just do whatever they wanted to. And for the most part, based on obviously what you're describing statistically, they were able to do it, whether they decided to drop or try to force pressure. They weren't able to do any of it. How does that change? Obviously, personnel will need to change a little bit, but what can you see tactically that could change, that could maybe help this roster a little bit going into next season?
Yeah, it's got to be one of those two things. Your defense. Sorry, I rattled my camera. I'm doing this from a trash can right now.
No, you're good. You're good.
How fitting, by the way, that I'm doing it here. But you have to find players that can do one of those two things on defense. So either you have to find guys that can force more turnovers, and you can adjust your scheme that way, or you have to find either more sound perimeter defenders or a better rim protector. Ideally, you can do both of those things, right? I'm not sure how the Mavs really have the resources to do both of those things, to upgrade on the perimeter and inside. It's possible, but it remains to be seen if they can do it in one summer with only one or two picks that they can trade potentially. But, I think it is fixable. That is the thing. There are your there are your like singular transformative defensive players, guys like Anthony Davis, Draymond Green, your elite perimeter defenders like your Mikal Bridges and OG Anunobis or whatever, Alex Caruso's, that can
Mm-hmm.
almost single-handedly make your defense respectable in the way that a guy like Luka or Kyrie can do on the offensive side of the ball. I think the Mavs though need quantity as much as they need quality. A guy like Dorian Finney-Smith, I think, is an amazing defender. He's not going to make your All NBA team. He's never going to get like 2 or 3 steals per game. He's not going to block 2 or 3 shots per game. But what he can do is at least take away the opponent's fastball. Like
Mm-hmm.
you can beat Dorian. You can give him 20, 30, 40 points if you're really feeling it, but you're going to have to earn it. You're not going to be able to, if you love going left, John Morant, well, hey, you're going to have 5 turnovers tonight because he knows you're going left. And you're never going to get to your spot. You're going to have to hit pull-ups. You're going to have to go right. If you're Dame Lillard and you want to like step back going right, well, Dorian's going to take that away from you. So you're going to have to get to the rim and hope that you can navigate among the trees. Dorian is not shutting you down, but he's at least forcing you to like think. He's forcing you to try. And over the course of the game, he's forcing you into so many inefficient decisions that hopefully by the end, it's going to manifest itself in a bad box score line. So I think the Mavs just need guys like that. They don't need one A+ guy. Having one of them would be super tight, don't get me wrong, but I think they need like 2 B+ guys or 2 B guys or 3 B- guys. It's like, just give me more guys that can at least do something, make some sort of impact on defense. It's kind of like on offense, how we talk about like the Mavs just need a couple more guys that can do something off the dribble. Nothing too complicated, just do something a little different. I think if they can find guys that can play defense that way, just force the opponent to like think or take one extra dribble or just like have to try 2% harder on every possession, then that will, over the course of 82 games, should give you a good enough defense to be able to make the playoffs with the kind of offense that they have.
Yeah, because when the Mavericks were playing with the kind of, margin of error, which is very small given the roster issues that they have, anything can make a difference. And unfortunately, too many times it felt like they allowed that margin of error to be exceeded based off of what they were doing throughout the course of the year. You started to touch on it because for all the issues this team had defensively, we'll get to Luka and Kyrie here in just a little bit, but talk about doing something different. One of the biggest surprises and pleasant surprises for the Mavs this year was rookie Jaden Hardy and the way that he played. And as I've talked to people, I said, what struck me most about his game was it was the fearlessness at which he played the game with, which is sometimes fairly uncommon for a rookie, given the biggest lights and, the stages that you're playing on. My man never saw a jump shot he didn't like, was never afraid to go attack the rim. And he played with a kind of ferocity that you look at and you say, well, yeah, there's some things that you can grow up in your game and allow your game to grow within you. I can work with that. And I felt myself saying that a lot throughout the course of the season. But Jaden Hardy's like, oh, I can work with that. Because if you have that kind of mentality, I think we can figure out a way to be able to hone some of that to be able to make it even that much more productive and more efficient. How did you feel about his growth as a player throughout the course of the year?
Yeah, he's got all that intangible stuff down. Like you said, he is not shy. Doesn't matter if he's missed the last 3 shots, he's not going to pass up the 4th one. And, sometimes there are some guys where you're like, please, for the love of God, just please pass up the 4th one. But he's got such a good jump shot. Like his mechanics are so smooth. He's already got such a quick release. He's super confident. And like he has demonstrated that he has the touch at all levels, except for that one like 2-week span in the G League. That was the single reason that he wasn't a first-round pick. He shot poorly for like a month, and that was it. Otherwise, throughout his entire life, he's been a really good shooter. So I'm not afraid of letting him shoot, and he's not afraid of shooting either, which is really important. I think with him, like it's for 20-year-olds and 21-year-olds, it's usually almost overwhelming to think and consider all the things that they have to get better at, because generally guys just come into the NBA with a lot of holes in their game. It's really hard to be really good at this level right away. But with Hardy, it's so easy to point at 1 or 2 things that he just really needs to get better at. 1, ball security, just generally just tightening up your handle a little bit. especially if you're going to do more, not necessarily like initiating the offense, but being that security blanket guy, the safety valve kick out, like, oh, I'm Kyrie, I'm double teamed. Jaden, go do something. You have 5 seconds to do something. And can you do that without dribbling it, way up by your eyeballs? 2, finishing around the rim. And, that is something that it's not easy to get better at, obviously, because like I'm 30, almost 32 years old and I suck at layups. But, for a guy like Jaden, it shouldn't be too hard. Super quick, super explosive, fearless. We saw him throw down some pretty vicious dunks, so we know he can get up there. It's just about doing it over and over again, practicing different angles, practicing touch. And hey, there's not many people better in the world to learn touch around the basket and creativity around the basket from than his own teammate, Kyrie, at least for the next month and a half or so, hopefully beyond. But it's very easy to identify like the steps that Hardy needs to take in order to make this like very linear improvement in his second year. And I don't see why, I'm trying to not get like too carried away, but I don't see why this upcoming season, barring any sort of like unforeseen changes to the rotation or his role or whatever, why he can't be like a pretty consistent, reliable 12 to 15 point per game off the bench guy. And if you can get, close to 15 points per game on pretty good marks and your team is not bad, you're all of a sudden in the 6 man of the year conversation. And so, I think that's like a realistic goal for him, next season. Granted, maybe he exceeds that because this year, frankly, I wasn't expecting him to play hardly at all with the Mavs. I thought he would spend all year with the Legends, but he went down there and just dominated. He kicked everybody's butt for like 3 weeks, and the Mavs like, all right, that's enough. Just you've earned it. Come on. Yeah. So if maybe he can do better than that. I have no idea, but yeah, I mean, I think it's just, again, he's 20 years old, and you can say like, if you can just fix these 2 things on offense, then you're already there, and that's really, really impressive.
He gives me Jamal Crawford vibe is what he gives me. A guy who is an instant bucket, can go get any shot that he wants to. Obviously, Crawford became, a terrific player. I think a 3-time 6th Man of the Year award winner in the league. He gives me that kind of vibe as a guy that, as he continues to grow in his game, that can be an instant scorer and at times start for you if needed, but be an instant bucket coming off the bench, for you. And a guy like him, Josh Green, who we saw improve, in certain aspects of his game. I think there's a little bit more control to his game at times, obviously developing a little bit more of a 3-pointer. A couple of young guys here that you look at as we kind of move toward the Luka and Kyrie situation that you see as potential foundational pieces with young guys there. But obviously for Mavericks fans, the whole Luka and Kyrie experience or experiment, however you want to call it, it didn't go the way that they wanted it to. Obviously, the two together, when they played, they went 5 and 11 together on the floor at the same time. What for you, though, gave you hope that Luka and Kyrie, if Kyrie remains with this team beyond just this season, that says, okay, these two can make music together and can do so at a high level that can be consistently on a night-to-night basis for this team?
I think going back to last season, the Mavs go all the way to the conference finals. They went on this great run. It was because they played more isolation and scored more efficiently in isolation than any other team in the league, basically all season long, but especially in the back half of the year following the KP trade and through the playoffs. It was just Luka and Brunson and Dinwiddie taking turns, cooking their guy one-on-one. And if they ever sent a double team, it was an easy swing, open 3, and you got guys in the corner that can knock them down. And, the Mavs are really missing that element of their offense early in the year. Without Brunson, Dinwiddie wasn't exactly able to replicate his 2-point efficiency and kind of his dynamic off-ball play in the starting lineup and the way that he was able to do it off the bench last season. And so they were missing that other guy. It too often just put way too much stress on Luka. But Kyrie can do that. I mean, he is one of the best one-on-one scorers of all time, not just in the NBA now. I mean, going back 75 years or however long it's been. And so if the Mavs want to continue playing that way, they have arguably 2 of the best, if not the best, one-on-one players in the NBA. So super easy way to score really efficiently. I think understandably, there was kind of this sort of like, are they ever going to set screens for each other? Are they ever going to like run plays? Kind of
Because I wanted to see
sentiment.
that more. I'm not gonna lie to you, but I wanted to see them screen for each other a lot more than what they actually did, because I felt like they could put teams in peril a little bit more by using each other as screeners if they were on the floor at the same time together.
Yeah, yeah, and me too. But with the speed that Luka plays at, he uses screens more for like angles and getting
Mm-hmm.
switches than he does like causing havoc, right? Like he's not flying around the corner from a screen ever. Like he is
Right.
definitely taking his time. And generally teams are going to put their best or second best defender on Kyrie. And so from Luka's perspective, it doesn't make much sense to go, to point at Kyrie and say, "Hey, come here, set a screen." Now, the inverse is a little more interesting because you think of Luka's frame, like he does have the frame to potentially set pretty good screens and force at least a little bit of chaos. But I think generally, as long as the Mavs offense remains this sort of like target the mismatch and go at them in isolation kind of offense, like that's their style. I don't think we're going to see too much interplay between the two of them, but that's fine. Go back to the 2016 finals, look at the shot when Kyrie hits the three over Steph to win the finals. Where is LeBron? He's in the corner. Like they did not screen for each other basically throughout that entire game, because the Warriors were putting Iguodala on LeBron. And if
Mm-hmm.
Kyrie got the favorable matchup, why would you want to bring Andre Iguodala into the action? Why would you want to bring Draymond Green or Klay Thompson in the action? No, let's get Steph on me. Let's get Festus Ezeli and
Mm-hmm.
Maurice Spates on me. And so I think that's how the Mavs are going to continue to play. I think there's definitely more opportunities for them to screen for each other, and generally for Dallas to run more set plays, especially creative off ball stuff to get Kyrie a clean catch on the ball. Because he is so quick and dynamic. Like if you give him just like if you build in space for him, then he can really exploit it in pretty impressive ways. So I think there's more room for them to run set stuff, and to maybe screen for each other more. But I really liked what I saw. It does just playing that way forces them to do a lot, and it also forces the other players on the floor to be able to shoot the three consistently at a high level. Otherwise, you are going to have to endure a lot of dry spells throughout games. But that's just kind of the nature of the beast.
And to your point, Jason Kidd kind of talked about some of that throughout the course of the year with the idea of Luke and Kyrie screening for each other. It's like, well, typically both of them are going to see the opponent's two best defenders. So having them, yes, in theory, screen for each other may sound good, but you're also bringing in probably the two best defenders for the opponent and trying to work around that to figure out how the best way to initiate offense. It's funny because I think for some of us, wanting to see Luka off ball a little bit more. And we saw that at times when Kyrie was going off against, Sacramento or whatever the case may be. Luka was like, all right, cool, you got it. And you just go ahead and do your thing. Is there opportunities for him to play off ball more, or is this offense so focused on what 77 does that it's more about Kyrie having to adjust to Luka based on what they want to do offensively?
So this is not a criticism of Luka, okay? But in order to be an effective off-ball player, you have to be able to be some sort of threat whenever you don't have the ball, right? And if you think of what Luka is really, really good at, it is driving, um, with the help of a screen, typically finding the open guy, and then also he likes going into the step back three. What Luka doesn't really do is cut hard, move fast, navigate a lot of screens, catch off a screen and rise to shoot, or generally just catch and shoot, you know, uh, even like wide open shots. He'll like
Mm-hmm.
get a kick out pass and then sort of like really look at the basket and sometimes step back anyway, you know. And so if he's
He'll
not
never be
gonna,
a catch and shoot guy. He'll never be
no,
a
I
catch
mean
and
maybe
shoot
not.
guy.
Yeah, and so until he is, or if he never becomes that, then that's just not going to be a part of his game. But if he can be a catch and shoot guy, or a catch off a screen guy, or this very dynamic cutter where you can give him, a screen at a certain angle that gives him two or three choices, and he can read the defense and then make the right move, then you can implement that into your offense. But as it stands now, Luka's not really again, this is not a criticism of him. He's one of the best half-court players of all time, but he's not really quick enough to exploit little crevices in the defense. He doesn't have the verticality to like backdoor cut for a lob. He's not really a willing catch and shoot 3-point shooter, and he can't like fly around screens the way that Steph can and catch on the move and do stuff. Generally he is a dribble handoff, get into the pick and roll and make something happen kind of player. And until he develops something else, I think that's generally what he's going to do. Now, I think they also started running a lot more post-ups for him with Kyrie, and that really puts a kind of unique pressure on the defense, because if he's in the right corner posting up his man in the mid post from like 18 feet away, pretty obvious to tell where the double team is going to come from, and then you get the defense into rotation and it's super easy. That is a style of playing off ball. But the whole point of that is to get the ball in the post to where he's on the ball. So it doesn't really count in my opinion. But yeah, I mean, until he kind of develops some other sort of, element to his game, I really feel like he kind of is what he is. Luckily, he's one of the best all time at what he does. So it's not that big of a deal.
It's funny because I think a couple of years ago when he was devastating, getting to the middle of the paint, with the floater game, and obviously, continuing to improve from the 3-point line. One of the things that I loved most was put that big son of a gun in the post and let him beat people up down there. I know, obviously, he's got to have the ball in his hand because he's initiating offense and controlling the pace of the game with his ability to create for himself and others. But man, when he put people into the post and got physical and was able to just back guys down and be able to exploit them at the rim, I thought, to me, that's where his game went to another level, because how then do you stop him? Because you can't defend him in the post. His floater game now is really good. And when he's focused in on his long distance shooting, he's pretty doggone good from three as well, even though he won't necessarily be a catch and shoot guy. But he just became a 3-level scorer that I just wonder, with Kyrie being a part of this offense, how much can we see of that given how multifaceted Luka's game is offensively in that way?
Yeah, and he shot, I think, 59% on twos this year, a career high. And he's been one of the best post-up, like in terms of points per possession and shooting percentage and everything, one of the most efficient post-up players in the league ever since he came in. And that's even as a rookie. Like, he's unbelievable in the post, like rivaling Dirk levels of efficiency in the post, which is just crazy to even think about. And when you have a guy like Kyrie, who is really quick, he can, in the way that maybe Luka can't, Kyrie can catch out of a double team and make something happen if he has this much room and that much time. He can hit that gap. He can find the open player. He can, make that cut. And Kyrie's got an extraordinary basketball IQ as well. I mean, he really, really sees the game at a high level. And so, if he's the guy making the entry pass to Luka, you can't really double team Luka to leave Kyrie open. You got to leave Luka on an island one-on-one against whoever it is, generally a guy that he's bigger and stronger than, and it's going to be a pretty easy shot for the Mavs. So that is a really, really reliable weapon they can go to. Surprisingly, though, we didn't see them do it a lot in crunch time, which was really weird, because for as many struggles as they had in the fourth quarter this year, you figure that's probably your most reliable way to create an easy shot. So why wouldn't you just spam that over and over again? But maybe they'll do it more next season.
Yeah, and that to me was one of the most disappointing aspects of the season, was too many games that were given away against inferior opponents or teams that were not at 100%. You think about the games against Denver, the Oklahoma City Thunder blowing a 16-point lead in the fourth quarter, the Pelicans. Like, there were games that this team just gave away that obviously came back to haunt them at the end of the season. Big picture wise, before we kind of go into, the draft, before we end today, where do you see this team? A lot of moving parts. They brought in JaVale McGee, didn't necessarily work out in terms of, consistent rotational minutes, given some of the things that, his coaching staff has wanted to do. I can't not have this conversation with you and not talk about what I felt like was the most polarizing aspect of this season when it came to Christian Wood. What is it? What's going on? Help me, as somebody who's trying to help Mavs fans out here. The whole Christian Wood thing. What was it? Why did it go wrong and not happen the way that I think Mavs fans pleaded and begged for it to happen this year?
Yeah, it was very tough. I think right whenever the Mavs traded for him, it might have even been whenever I was on with you, but I was on with somebody on the fan, and I was like, I'm pretty sure that defensively he needs to play five. Like, I don't think that he can play power forward on
Mm-hmm.
defense. I think he's got to be your man in the middle. The problem, though, is the Mavs just didn't have a lot. Like at the very top of the show, we talked about how they just didn't have a lot of good perimeter defenders this year. And Wood did have that run, a couple weeks there in December and January where he was blocking some shots, but for the long haul, he just wasn't very consistent in that regard, or even at pressuring shots. He oftentimes would pick up a lot of fouls trying to contest shots, and that's not good because you want him to be able to stay on the floor. Offensively, though, he kind of has to be, in my opinion, he kind of has to be a four. But you want him to be involved in the pick and roll game, but that means that your five has to be able to shoot. Okay, so the best player that he could play with that could be a five on offense, but still shoot, but then be a four on defense and be switchable is Maxi Kleba. And they were very good together. And then Maxi tore his hamstring, and that was really it. From then on out, your only option to play Wood was either power forward next to Powell or McGee, or at the five with like Dorian and later Josh Green as your four. And both of those situations are just untenable, offensively and defensively. It kind of takes a very, much in the way that it took very specific kind of situational personnel to make KP work super well at both ends of the floor. The same thing can be said about Christian Wood. And now both of those guys are very good, but the Mavs just did not have the players and the system on either end of the floor to really maximize what Wood can bring to the table. And then also too, this is like the most fundamental thing about the Mavs offense is they run a lot of pick and roll. And, trigger warning, I'm about to talk about Dwight Powell. Dwight Powell sets monster screens. And that really matters a lot for Luka because Luka is not a burner. He needs really solid contact on these screens in order to create any sort of separation because he can't do it himself. He needs the guy, he needs the lead blocker. He needs Larry Allen to get out there and create some space for him. And, think back to KP, think about Christian Wood. Both of those guys slip screens because they want to, kind of feign like they're going to set the screen. And then that gives them a little extra time to read the defense. They can cut to the basket or they can pop out and get their little 18-footer, the three-point shot. But that doesn't work for Luka. It just does not work for your biggest star, your most important player. And so, that's why I think on offense, the Mavs favored Powell over him. JaVale McGee wasn't setting, brick wall screens either. And the Mavs moved on from him pretty quickly. Maxi Kleba is sort of dynamic in the pick and roll because he can roll and pop, but he's not really laying guys out the way that Powell can either. And so, I think if you're cooking up the ideal big man to play with Luka, it's maybe a big man that has Wood's skill set or KP's skill set, their athleticism, their length, their dynamic ability to score from anywhere, but they also have to be able to set screens like Dwight Powell. And until they find a guy that can do both of those things, they're always going to favor, in my opinion at least, they're always going to favor the guy that can maximize Luka because Luka is your best player. Your offense revolves around him. Your offense does not revolve around Wood or Porzingis or Maxi Kleba or JaVale McGee. And so, it's a very tough decision and a very tough situation. Obviously, he's a really, really good player, but just both ends of the floor, it just wasn't the best fit of all time. And maybe you totally disagree with what I'm saying, but that was my read on it.
No, I agree. And it's funny because as you were describing kind of the ideal center, it made me think of a guy who's currently in the playoffs right now. He happens to be the center from Miami, who I kind of like. He's pretty good.
That was not a tampering nod. That was no. I understand who you're talking about.
Yes, that's why I didn't say the name because I know you know who I'm talking about when it comes to that particular player. But at the same time, look, now as we look at this team going forward for the rest of this offseason, an important one, obviously, for this team, we know what this comes down to. The Mavericks either keep their top 10 protected pick or they don't, and Jalen Brunson and company in New York are waiting for it if that does happen. Just give me your ideal scenario outside, of course, of Victor Wembanyama, who, of course, if you fall to number one. It was funny, though. I will say this. I was having a conversation with someone, and I was like, look, if you do, let's just say the Mavericks do move up and they get the number one pick, consensus is you would take Victor Wembanyama. But wouldn't it be kind of cool to be like, hey, 29 other NBA teams, we know what you want to do. What are you willing to give up to come get Victor? Like, what's your price to come get Victor? Again, I probably wouldn't do it, but it would be very intriguing if the Mavericks found themselves in that spot to be able to dangle Victor Wembanyama for the rest of the league. Like, hey, y'all want him? Come get him, and let's see what you're willing to give up.
Well, I can't answer this question, but you can.
Uh-huh.
What is the worst player or worst package that you would accept for the number one pick? Like, what is the least amount of stuff it would take for you to move off that pick?
The least amount of stuff. Oh man. I mean, it's got to be at least at worst your number one player, whomever that is. Like that. If you're telling me that Victor Wembanyama is the next, blend of all these dudes and it's going to be dead for the next 15 years, I'm gonna need at minimum your best player. At minimum.
I mean, like we're talking like multi-time All-Star, All-NBA caliber guy.
Yeah.
That would be. That's probably at least, and maybe get off some bad money.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. You can have a couple contracts, that I need to get off of, but that would be a very interesting conversation if that were to come up. So, what does this team need? There's obviously some really good players in this draft. Let's say the Mavericks are able to keep it. Are you wanting them to maybe move off of it to try and do something different? Or is it more so, look, maybe our best path is, Luka, to get a little bit younger, get one of these draft picks, and then be able to build around it? Because we do have some foundational pieces with Jaden Hardy, Josh Green. How would you, if you were put on your GM hat, you would move forward in some of that way?
If I'm role-playing as the Mavs and Nico Harrison, I think that if they get the 10th pick, they're probably more likely to trade it because I think they said it themselves in their exit interview thing. Nico was like, we need defenders with high basketball IQs. Generally speaking, 19-year-olds and 20-year-olds are not going to be good defenders with high basketball IQs. They might have one of those two things, but they're not going to be ready-made. And the Mavs are really in a situation, if everyone follows Tim McMahon on Twitter, they're in a situation where time is of the essence, right? They can't wait for some dude to develop. And so I think they'd be more likely to trade either for a player straight up or with a player for a better player, or like you trade back from 10 to 20 and you get a player or whatever, something like that. Where it gets interesting, though, is if they move up. And not just move up specifically or like generally, but like if they move up to 4, because, the top 3 guys in whatever order, Wembanyama, Brandon Miller, Scoot Henderson, those are like your clear bona fide top 3 picks in whatever order, right?
Mm-hmm.
The draft kind of starts at 4. What is a team willing to move up, to give to move up to 4? What is a team willing to give to move up to 3 or to even 2? And so if the Mavs move up, but they don't get the number 1 pick, I think that's where it gets really interesting, because you can draft a stud who's ready to play and who might have a good IQ and who might be able to play defense and who might be able to contribute to a winning team. Or you could survey the league and maybe get something really, really, really good, that you wouldn't be able to get for 10. That is the more interesting scenario to me, because again, I think they're probably going to move it if they're at 10.
Sure.
I'm not sure what they would do if they get 2, 3, or 4. And I think there's very valid arguments for both, especially if you can get a wing, because they desperately need a wing. They don't need another guard. They got plenty of those, but they need a guy that's like 6'8" and that can score or defend or both. There's a couple of those guys in this draft. So I'm not sure what they would do. That's where they would, I think, be really, really tempted to call every team 2 or 3 times just to see what they're thinking.
I'm not going to lie to you. If the Mavericks somehow have the basketball god smile on them and they find themselves in the top 3, and let's say it's obviously either 2 or 3, My personal pick, I know there's, people have some issues with him, maybe with off the floor stuff. Brandon Miller's the guy for me. If you are able to find your way to sneak in the top three, and obviously Scoot Henderson and Wembanyama and Miller, as you said, those top three guys, if he's there and you're there at 3 or 2, yeah, man, Brandon Miller would be the guy. Personally speaking, for me, he would be the guy that I would take if I were the Mavericks, because I can work with that and be able to feel comfortable with him stepping in right away to help out this team.
Here is something I've been thinking about this for a really long time because there's no basketball to watch. So all I do is just think about dumb stuff. But 3 of the top 4 teams in terms of odds just spend a first rounder on a center. Houston, Alperen Şengün; Detroit, Jalen Duren; Charlotte, Mark Williams. Ostensibly, and Detroit also has a bunch of other bigs, Bagley, Wiseman, Isaiah Stewart. Ostensibly, you would want to keep all of those players because they're all good and they all have a lot of potential. But if you win the lottery, unless you plan on playing Wemby at the 4, all of a sudden now, is there another 20, 21-year-old center that is available for trade that you could potentially have for the number 10 pick? I don't know what it would cost to move up, but that would allow the Mavs to get – this is I don't even know if this is realistic, but that would allow the Mavs to get a guy that is on a cost-controlled contract in the way that a rookie is, but that does have NBA experience and does address a need, like a major area of need, and that can help immediately. And that's something that I think could be really interesting. But of course, every other team that needs a big man is also going to be thinking about that too. So I'm just not sure. I'm not sure, but I think that's something that could maybe pop up that could be a possibility too.
Mavs fans are going to be sitting on pins and needles over the next several days as they get ready for the NBA Draft Lottery on May the 16th. We'll see if the basketball gods are feeling good that day to smile upon Dirk's Mavericks to see if they can move up to maybe have some better odds in this draft. And most importantly, I'm sure for Mavs fans, let's just keep the pick. Just start there. If we happen to move up, great. But at minimum, keep the pick, because the last thing a Mavericks fan wants to see is the pick sit there at number 11, and who's waiting for it in New York? Oh, that's right, a number 11 in Jalen Brunson.
It'd be brutal. The only silver lining from conceding the pick this year is that they just know that it's gone.
Finally,
they got 25 and 27, and it's not hanging over their head. But that is the most copium. If I can plug something really quickly,
sure.
I'm not going to be in the room when they're doing the ping pong balls, but I will be at the lottery. We're gonna and I'm also going to be at the Combine next week too in Chicago. So we're going to be turning out a bunch of content on mostly the Mavs YouTube channel. So follow Mavs Studio 41 on Twitter, and then subscribe to the Mavs on YouTube, because we're going to be putting out a lot of stuff, prospect analysis, interviews with Nico and other people that are at the lottery representing the Mavs, and from media and stuff. So it's going to be really, really good.
Well, looking forward to that coverage. I'm sure for Mavericks fans, an opportunity to have a little bit of hope going into what is one of the more anticipated summers in quite some time, given who could and could not be on this roster by the time we get to training camp in September. Bobby Karalla of Mavs.com, Studio 41. As always, my man, thank you so much for the time, the perspective. I'll get to nerd out talking basketball with you, because I know how much you love the game, have a passion for the game, and love talking about the game. And it's always a terrific conversation with you, man, about this team. So I sincerely appreciate you taking the time with me, man.
Anytime, man. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.